Welcome, everybody. Shiur number 634. We're learning today Le'ilei Nishmas Moshe Dov Ben Rabban Zisa Le'ilei Nishmas Blima Basra Moshe and Yitzchak Yosef Ben Meri Malka should be Malchzilus Shuva. Getting back to a malacha of KOSHAIR tying. Okay, just real quickly to Chazarov, we went through last time from the Shulchan Aruch. We read it basically out of the Shulchan Aruch Rav and the Oitzer Halachas. Just to read the English section in the Shabbos home, he explains very beautiful. Although a single knot and a single bow are not considered knots individually. In other words, a single knot is not considered a knot because we said the single knot, the only way to really make a single knot is just to intertwine the two laces. Again, when you're talking in reference to a shoe. And a single bow is also not considered a knot. But a single knot with a bow on top of it, again, the intertwining of the laces with a bow on top of it is considered a knot. Since the bow holds the underlying knot in place and it does not unravel completely with one tuck. Actually, with one tug, not one tug, one tug, one pull, but I don't quite understand that. I mean, usually with one pull you could open it, but to make a long story short, that's not the point. The point is over here that however he ends off, however, this is not a professional knot. This is not considered a kesher uman, and thus it may be tied temporarily. Again, it has to be done for less than 24 hours. And b'di'evid, worst case scenario, b'shasat chak, less than 7 days. But in general, we try and stick to less than 24 hours. Okay, so now the question comes up, the question comes up, we spoke about the initial twining, which just real quickly to read again the Lashon from the Sefer Lamates Malachas, page 792, the initial winding action one performs when tying his shoes is technically a knot, yet one is permitted to make it because the lace will unwind on its own in a very short period of time. That's what we said. Just one more quick thing I wanted to mention, which he brings down, which we saw in reference to the garbage bag, just to review again real quickly. One may tie the two handles or ends of a plastic shopping bag or garbage liner in a single wind knot, like we said, even though the nature of the plastic causes the single knot to stick and remain in place for a while, this is nevertheless not a true kesher bind because, again, it's just a simple winding, and we said that is not a problem. Then we said putting the bow up on top of that, that could be done only less than 24 hours. Now, the question is, what about to double up that bow? In other words, I made the initial twining, and now I made the bow up on top of my laces, and I want to make sure that it, doesn't fall apart, doesn't open. As we know, many people wearing shoes with laces, you start walking a block or two. If you have a simple winding of the laces and then the bow up on top, a block or two, they're going to open. And many times you just have to keep on, it gets a little bit annoying, you have to keep on tying it. But let's say one wants to do the winding, the bow, and then just double up the bow. In other words, they're not really doing anything, they're just sort of like making a knot up on top of the bow. Would that be a problem to keep it more sturdy? So the Sefer Oitzer Halachas brings down interesting on when he talks about in Siman Shun Yud Zayin Ois Lamed Gimel. He says like this: Yesh Omrim Delei Osru Asiyas Kesher Al Gabi Kesher. There are those that say that we didn't asr making a double knot. Elikisha Koisher Kesher Alav Al Tachtay Mamish. In other words, person makes a knot and then they make another knot on top of that. That's called a double knot. Right, so that we said has a din of a kesher uman, a craftsman's knot, whereby even for a short period of time it's not allowed to be done. He says further, does the Sefer Oitzer Halachas, aval im yesh beineim hefsik aniva is shari. That, in other words, if one makes a knot, which we're going to call in this case the twining of the shoelace, and then they make the bow. In other words, if im yesh beinayim hefsek aniva is shari. In other words, then they make the twining of the lace, and then they make the bow. So you have the bow on top of the knot. So valpizeh, says the Sefer Oitzer Halachas further, valpizeh shruche na'olim shichbendel. In other words, the shoelaces hakoisher ba'aniva al gabe kesher. You're tying the bow on top of the kesher, on top of the knot, which is, again, the initial knot is the twining of the laces, and then you're putting the bow on top of that, kederech ha'olam, which is the way regular people tie their shoes in general. Then is mutter, he says, is mutter likshar shnei lulois aniva zu bezu. In other words, you would be allowed to double up the bow. In other words, mutter likshar shnei lulois aniva zu bezu. You're making one bow and then another bow. It's not really another bow, but it's in other words, you have the twisting, the twining of the laces. You now have the bow, and then you just double up the bow again. You make sort of like a loose type of knot, but with a full bow on top of it. So, lemaisi, one does that, and like this, the shoe stays a little bit stronger. But he says, that would be okay. He brings on that would be okay. We'll see in a minute why, we'll see in a minute why it explains. But Uvavadi says one thing: sheizor shaloi lahachnis besoicha kesher shnei kitzvay sachud. Uvavadi sheizor shaloi lahachnis. One should not put in besoicha kesher shnei kitzvay sachud. Make sure not to put the two ends of the knot or of the bow, the two ends, not to start tucking it into the knot. In other words, be careful to leave the two ends of the shoelace, laying there or just flapping, not to start tucking it in. Raklu lois aniva vovad. It'll just be two loops. In other words, you have two loops. You have the initial twining of the lace, and then you have a bow, and you loop it over again one more time up on top, and that is fine. So he says, why is that allowed? He says on the bottom, he explains. He says, "Kain hu b'sefer HILCHOS SHABBOS." Why? That's the HILCHOS SHABBOS brings it down like that. Kaven the kesher al gabe kesher einay rak chumra b'alma. The whole thing of a knot, making a double knot, is a chumra. We don't make double knots on Shabbos, but l'maisa it is a chumra, and we said b'makam sar one is allowed to open it. V'tzir zeh, he says, v'tzir zeh da'niva mafsik over here that we're going to say we're showing that a bow is in the middle. In other words, you have the bottom knot, which is again the intertwining of the laces, and then you have the bow. So the bow is really mafsik beinehem einay bechlal chumra haramad einay kesher amitz klal. In other words, that it's not considered a tight double knot. That double knot, which the Ramad and which the Shulchan Aruch was talking about, why we don't make double knots, is because of the fact we mentioned in the Mishabura. Why? Because of the fact that it has a din of a kesher uman, of a craftsman's knot. Why does it have a din of a craftsman's knot? Because of the fact that it's a tight knot, it's a durable knot, and it's not going to open. But this over here, when we're making the intertwining of the laces, and then we're making the bow, and then we just loop over the bow one more time to keep it a little bit sturdy, that is not the type of tight double knot that the Shulchan Aruch was talking about, and therefore it would not be a problem to make. I don't remember where I saw it, but it could be it was in the Oitzer Halachas, if I remember correctly. I can't find it right now. But Lamaisa, I saw brought down also that, and I do it myself. If you take the end of the bow, if you do it like that, a person, let's say, intertwines their lace, then they make the bow, and then they just loop it over one more time up on top. Most of the time, when you take the end of the bow, when person comes home from shul or comes home from the walk or wherever they went to learn, whatever the case is, they went to a friend, they come home, they want to take off their shoe, they just pull the string just like the regular way that the person does all the time. In other words, when a person intertwines the lace and they make one single bow, simply in general, you just pull the tip, and the whole thing just falls apart and opens up. Usually, in this case, it also does. I found myself, it does also just open up simply by pulling the tip, which means it's not it's not a powerful, durable, strong type of double knot, that which the Ramah was talking about, whereby we say it's a problem of kesher uman. It's you're just looping it over up on top, and it keeps it a little bit more stable like this. It doesn't keep on opening every 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the street. If one is walking, they have to keep on tying their shoe, and again make a bow, and again, intertwine the laces, and again put a bow like this. You loop it over, and it stays a little bit stronger, but it's not strong enough whereby it's a problem of a double knot. It's actually it is brought down in the HILCHOS SHABBOS in Perik Yud on the bottom in Ois Tezvav on the bottom, Ois Cotton Chav Ches. He talks just real quickly to read the lashon that that which we said, Shekesher es Shekosher eshtei halulois, one who loops it over again. In other words, they intertwine once, they put the bow up on top, and then they loop over the bow one more time. In moishech es kotza hasharach, if somebody pulls when they're finished and they want to take off their shoe, and they pull the tip of the shoelace, nitaris huanivois im hakesher she'al gabeim. In other words, the whole thing basically opens up. And I know, again, like I mentioned before, myself, I do it, and most of the time it works. For imkain, so therefore what? So with imkain adain yesh b'zeh kula da'niva. Therefore, one would still have the kula of making a bow. In other words, they still, as long as it's done within 24 hours, and one does it to open it up within 24 hours, it still has a din of a simple type of a kesher hedyet, a simple man's knot, a unskilled knot, and it's done less than 24 hours. It's no problem to open. Valkol panim bevadei ein bezeh chashash ma'aseh uman, and this would not have the din of the ma'aseh uman, the einer kesher amitz klal, because of the fact that, again, that it's not a sturdy, not a very durable, strong type of a knot, even though one flips it over. Okay, so just to real quickly sum up what we have from today's shiur, very important, that one who ties their shoe, so we said you could intertwine the lace on the bottom, you make the bow on top, and then just to make sure that it doesn't open up, one would be allowed to loop it over again. You intertwine the bottom, make the bow, and then loop it over again, and that will be perfectly fine, and simply because one gives it a pull at the end, again, as long as you don't tuck in the ends, not to tuck in the ends, but leave them hanging, and then when one is done, they could just pull the ends, and the whole thing falls apart again. Okay, this is all b'shem the Eitzer Halachos and HILCHOS Shabbos and so on. Aslachem bracha. Thank you for listening. Kol tov.